Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome you to part two of tonight's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. Now, the next hour promises to be quite an interesting discussion because we are talking about Israel and Syria. We know they are currently engaged in US mediated talks, trying to de escalate what they call tensions following recent airstrikes by Israel, and also in terms of the deep mistrust that exists following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Now, there are a number of issues that one can actually talk about and unpack. We can talk about the airstrikes. We can talk about the Turkish footprint in Syria. We can talk about the territorial expansion. And we've seen a lot of that happen since the collapse of the Bashar al-Assad government. We've seen how the IOF have expanded past the buffer zone. They've seized many parts of Syria and now establishing even new military positions inside southern Syria. And on the other side, we see demands come through from Syria for an end to the Israeli strikes and the withdrawals from some of the territories that were seized in 2024. Now, putting all of that together, we ask the question about Syria and the new power play. How does this tie in with the US and Israel and their ambitions in reshaping the country? My guest tonight, we've got Dr. Yvonne Ridley, a British journalist, and we also have got Jeenah, who is no stranger to the airwaves of Salam Media. Dr. Yvonne Ridley is an author and a public speaker as well, and Jeenah, a senior researcher at the Mapubungwe Institute. Dr. Yvonne and Naeem, to both of you, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome.
Walaikum salam.
Yes, Naeem, I'd like to actually begin with you. And, I've just painted a brief picture in my introduction as to what is playing out in Syria as well. And just by way of introduction, and just to provide an overview as to where we would like to take this discussion, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think, our starting point, I think, should be before December 2024. Syria was a state where a very brutal regime ruled that country and that nation, where they used sectarianism in order to keep people apart, in order to divide up positions of power and wealth, etc. That's both Bashar and his father Hafez al-Assad. And the brutality was quite extreme. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to suggest that the Syrian regime was one of the most brutal in the region. And I say that, quite carefully. What we've discovered, or what has been discovered, in terms of prisons, torture chambers, murder cells, etc., since then highlights that fact. Also, that the economy, particularly under Bashar, under Hafez, Hafez al-Assad, there was still some semblance of an attempt at kind of socialism. Under Bashar al-Assad, it became a crony capitalist state. And so, a lot of poverty, while those around the president were prospering. And lots of people have spoken about how, even if you were a fisherman, for example, you couldn't do business unless you had a share in your business from someone related to the president. The role of the mukhabarat, the intelligence services, with, even members of family spying on each other, etc. And then, of course, when the protests took place in 2011, the clampdown on that, extremely brutal. The protests demonstrations started with a few school kids who were then tortured, murdered, etc. And that then spiraled into the civil war that we see. So, from December 2024, we have a point where the task is to build a new Syria, a united Syria, a Syria that is able to provide for its citizens, which capacity was severely depleted, and a Syria that is secure. And that last point was, partly destroyed in the first hours of the entry of the opposition forces into Damascus, when Israel bombed its air force, took over territory, Syrian territory, which it still has not withdrawn from, etc. So Syria is in a very difficult situation. You had about half of the population, about 12 million people displaced, either internally or externally, of which about 3 million in the past year or so have returned to their homes, half of them from outside, half of them internally displaced. But there's lots of destruction, entire cities need to be rebuilt, etc. So the challenges facing whoever might be in leadership are enormous, and they have to find the best ways to do that without exposing the nation to another war.
Yes, Naeem. And also, Dr. Yvonne, one cannot look at this in isolation or in a vacuum, because when we're talking about dealing with a country like Israel, and you've got, in this case, when these talks are taking place, the United States trying to play or portraying that it is playing the role of an honest broker. How much does one actually read into this, considering that Israel, and when one looks at even the greater region, whether it has been the Abrahamic Accords, in terms of Israel and its ambitious expansion plan, and in terms of how Syria actually fits into this equation?
Well, these are very early days, and Naeem has rolled out a picture of what has gone on in the past and what we have in the future. And, I do welcome the transformation in Syria, but with a cautious optimism. Syria has, as we've heard, endured years of war, repression, foreign intervention, and enormous suffering. Any genuine move towards a more stable and accountable Syria has to be welcomed. But I remain cautious, because transformation is not just about changing the people at the top. It has to be reflected in the treatment of ordinary citizens, including those detained without charge or due process. And I'm really sad to report that there are scores of people in the former Assad prisons, including a friend of mine, the American journalist Bilal Abdul Karim. I think he's known to you, Inayat, and certainly to the station. And his case is a very real test of whether the new Syria is going to be different from the old. The green shoots of hope are there, the possibility of ending the cycle of dictatorship and war. But the biggest reason for optimism is the possibility that Syria can finally move beyond the decades of authoritarian rule and years of devastating civil war. Millions of Syrians want something much more than basic ideology, security, dignity, functioning institutions, and the ability to rebuild their lives. The task to rebuild Syrian sovereignty is enormous, but Syria has been a battlefield for competing foreign powers for years. During the civil war, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and the United States, as well as Israel, all had major interests or military involvement. So a genuinely sovereign Syria, able to make its own decisions rather than being a proxy battlefield, would be a huge development. But the country is virtually in rubble. Rebuilding institutions rather than personalities is going to be a priority. And this is crucial because the real test is whether Syria can develop institutions that survive changes of leadership, an independent judiciary, professional civil service, accountable security services, and functioning local government would be much more significant than simply changing a face at the top. There is enormous potential if the new political order can persuade Syria's different communities that they have a future within the country. You know, I'm talking about the Sunnis, the Alawites, the Christians, the Kurds, the Druze, and other communities. They all need guarantees that they are citizens first and foremost, not communities whose safety depends upon whoever happens to control Damascus. And then there is potentially an enormous economic dividend from the peace, and that is in reconstruction. You know, where do you begin? Syria needs roads, hospitals, schools, electricity, housing, and jobs. Reconstruction could become a vehicle for actually bringing Syrians together, provided it isn't captured by political elites or foreign interests. And there's all, I think, Naeem touched on this, the return of the Syrians. Millions of Syrians have been displaced. If conditions genuinely improve, voluntary and safe return could become one of the most powerful indicators that Syria is changing. But voluntary is the key word. People must return because they believe Syria is safe, not because they have nowhere else to go. But now for the red flags, this is where I think the plight of Bilal Abdul Karim becomes particularly powerful. This arbitrary detention, you know, you can't say, for me, well, this is one of the clearest tests of whether we are really going to see transformation. If someone can be, like Bilal, can be detained indefinitely without being formally charged, given access to a lawyer, or brought before a court, then the language of transformation starts to ring hollow. That doesn't require a great leap of faith. You know, Bilal Abdul Karim was the founder of the OGN news service. And this new regime under Ahmed al Sharaa must show that it does not fear journalism. You know, journalism is not a crime. We've seen how Israel treats journalists in the Middle East. We don't want to see that becoming the norm in this new Syria. So I would like to see some practical things done straight away. And again, going back to Bilal Abdul Karim, charge him or release him. Give him access to a lawyer, give him a fair hearing. And that is the basic standard that should apply to everyone.
Yes, Yvonne. Yes,
So
I'd like to bring Naeem back into the discussion. And Naeem, Yvonne makes a point about this is not about simply changing about the face at the top. And just to understand the strategic reality in terms of why Syria has become such a central target. And again, the question that I had posed to Yvonne earlier on as well, in terms of these talks that are taking place, the US assuming its role as an honest broker, but also in terms of why Syria has actually become a central target for competing or of competing regional powers. If you could unmute, please, Naeem. Your mic is muted.
Okay, I think you can hear me now. As Yvonne pointed out, I mean, it's not that Syria has now become a target for competing forces. This has been the case. Certainly, this was the case from 2011 during the civil war. All of the countries that she spoke about, Turkey, Iran, Russia, the US, Iraq, etc., all Israel, etc., all of these countries believed that they had some kind of a stake, that they had some kind of interests. And this is one of the tragedies, is that Syrians were not allowed to kind of find their own way in a sense. I mean, I'm not saying that no one should assist them and they should find their own way by themselves, but anyone who got involved because of their own interests, and those were multiple actors. So that has been the case since 2011, but it was the case before 2011 as well. And that is why during the civil war, the issue of Syria for many activists around the world became quite a hot and debated issue because of other allegiances rather than allegiances to the Syrian people. So it is now a big target as a kind of continuation of that. In fact, I think it might be a bit of a smaller target now than it was before. As regards the talks that you're talking about and the role of the United States, look, none of the three of us in this discussion would ever believe that the United States is an honest broker in anything. If the past few months of the war against Iran has shown us anything, it's that the United States is very comfortable with lying bald-facedly and then actually seeming to believe its own lies. The honest broker notion you can apply for the past 5-6 decades to the role that the US has played in the Palestinian issue. Sorry, my camera is getting hijacked here. In the Palestinian issue, the US is never an honest broker. The US has two important agendas. One is the United States, and the second one is Israel. And so even with Syria, I think under Trump, and this is not to give any kind of praise or compliment to Trump, but under Trump, the adherence to the Israeli agenda is a little less than it was under previous American presidents. And so you see, even in the Syrian issue, that the Israelis, Netanyahu in particular, make certain demands, and those are not necessarily fulfilled by the United States. But that doesn't mean that the US is a friend of Syria over Israel. It simply means that the US is seeing that its interests can better be met in a particular way, dealing with Syria in a particular way, than dealing with Syria simply through the lens of Israeli interests. So the US is not an honest broker. It's not going to be an honest broker in terms of discussions between Israel and Syria. And ultimately, it's going to be the responsibility of Syrians and others in that West Asia region to ensure that Syria's security is protected. As we again saw in the past few months, the United States might pretend to want to provide security to its allies in the region, but when it comes to the crunch, they don't. All of the GCC states have proven that, as have, in the Syrian case, as have the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led groups. They were funded and supported with weapons and money, etc., by the United States, and then, unceremoniously dumped. So the future for the region, and certainly for Syria, is in finding arrangements within the region, the people of the region, and for Syrians themselves to chart a way forward that will guarantee the security internally and externally.
Yes, Naeem. But also, Yvonne, when one looks at Israel, and this is important in terms of its ambitions and taking advantage of the situation in Syria at this point in time, a new leader, a country trying to rebuild itself, a country in chaos, millions of refugees coming back home again. And during this time of chaos. You know, Israel obviously has done what it has. We've seen it bomb Syria multiple of times. But now that they are sitting at the table with the US facilitating the talks, and let's just focus on Israel and how ambitious is Israel and what do you think is their long term plan as far as their involvement with Syria goes?
Well, we know how ambitious Israel is because Benjamin Netanyahu stood up in the UN and held up a very clear map of a greater Israel, which showed that Israel had engulfed or swallowed or stolen large pieces of land from Saudi, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, and this was the greater Israel. And he was quite shameless about holding up this map. Forget the two-state solution, that's gone. He has a map of a greater Israel, which involves a huge chunk of Syria. So if I was a Syrian who settled in Europe, I wouldn't be making any plans to uproot just yet. And it goes back to the President of the United States. Donald Trump may be an effective broker, but I wouldn't call the United States an impartial broker. Washington has interests. It wants ISIS contained, Iranian and Russian influence diminished, Syria stabilized, and American troops eventually brought home. And it has now placed an extraordinary amount of faith in Ahmed al Sharaa. The question is whether Trump is prepared to use that enormous leverage when Damascus does something Washington doesn't like, particularly over the Kurds, the minorities, and, back to human rights again. Uh, and Bilal Abdul Karim, he is an American citizen, and he is being held without charge, without trial. Rumors of torture abound, and this will make the Americans uncomfortable. And if they push Trump, he was under pressure to deliver a deal that would benefit the Kurdish population. Well, once again, the Kurds have been shafted by America. Just today, their army has been dismantled and they have joined Syrian forces. Now, this is going to be a real acid test how they actually integrate and interact with each other. So I think that the next few weeks are going to be quite crucial for Ahmed al-Sharaa and his regime. But as I say, for ordinary Syrian people, I wouldn't uproot just yet because the region is still in absolute turmoil. And when, you've got the elections in Israel coming up, and if Benjamin Netanyahu wins again, which, no one can predict Israeli elections, but if Benjamin Netanyahu wins again, he will be bringing out that map. He will be emboldened, and he's made it quite clear he wants a war with Iran, but he's also promised the voters he will deliver a greater Israel. And so that is a huge problem, not just for Syria, it's a huge problem for Donald Trump as well.
Yes, Yvonne, we're going to put both you and Naeem on hold. I need to take a quick ad break. We're paying a few bills. We'll be back.
Hey, Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No, bye, you didn't.
Oh, no. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Randry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Randry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Searching for elite local and international investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Mayer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Mayer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Mayer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Mayer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmayer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Mayer, where every detail matters.
When you give water, you bring life to drought-affected communities, providing fresh water for drinking, cleaning, and growing. Your support helps Islamic Relief implement water, sanitation, and hygiene projects, providing clean water to communities around the world. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
It's a new beginning. It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
Well, we continue our discussion this evening, and we are talking about the talks taking place between Syria and Israel with my guest tonight, Dr. Yvonne Ridley and Naeem Jeenah. Naeem, just to continue and looking at someone like Ahmed al-Shara in terms of how vulnerable is he in these talks that are taking place? And the concern is, is there a probability of him possibly even caving in? And the reason why I'm asking this question is we've seen it in the past as well, where even in 2012, Hillary Clinton made a statement talking about overthrowing Assad that would benefit Israel by weakening or neutralizing Iran and isolating Hezbollah. And considering what has been playing out recently between the United States and its attack on Iran as well, and as a strategic objective, perhaps, to prevent Iran from establishing some presence, on the northern border of Israel, but also at the same time to prevent Syria from functioning as a logistical bridge between Tehran and Lebanon. Your mic, please, Naeem.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions there to start. Well, firstly, let me say that I don't think we should personalize this. Yes, Ahmed al-Sharra is the head of the government, of the administration, but it is not an administration that runs by diktat of one person at the top, unlike in the previous regime. And so when we say how vulnerable is he, we should really be asking how vulnerable is Syria, and the administration, the government that he runs as a whole. I mean, if Sharra gets assassinated tomorrow, the government and the nation is not going to simply collapse because of that. I think that there have been, what Yvonne mentioned earlier on, there have been some institutional growth in the past year and a half or so. So just that as a kind of preamble. So Syria is generally quite vulnerable, and not just in these talks. I mean, in these talks, yes, but in general, quite vulnerable. Part of their territory, and I'm not talking about the Golan Heights, which was occupied in 1967, but over the past year and a half, a significant part of their territory has been occupied by Israel. Israel clearly is funding Druze separatists in the south of the country, who yesterday I think it was had a motor car, a carcade, flying the Israeli flags together with the Syrian flags, and saying that they would rather be part of Israel than of Syria, etc. So the challenges that the state and the people of Syria face are enormous. They're very, very vulnerable. If the United States and Israel were to do to Syria now what it did to Iran at the end of February, I'm not sure that Syria would be able to withstand that. I'm pretty sure that they won't be able to. They don't have the defenses to be able to do that, etc. This is a new government. It's a new military, etc. I think that the greatest potential for the Syrian nation is the possibility of actually building a Syrian nation. That national question is extremely important, as a break from the past. So, Yvonne spoke about the Kurds, for example. Under the Assad regimes, Kurds were not even regarded as citizens. They were not given passports or ID documents. They could never leave the country because they were not recognized in that way. What we are now seeing is that there's talks about recognizing Kurdish as a national language alongside Arabic, which I think is a very positive thing. The integration of the Kurdish forces into the army, I think, is a very positive thing, because any state that is starting to rebuild cannot afford militias just running around. Even in December 2024, when Damascus was overrun, it was overrun not just by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the group that Ahmed al-Sharra was the head of, but several groups from the south, from the east and the west, and then from the north by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But all of those militias have, or the attempt is for all of those militias to dissolve, to shut down and to integrate into the armed forces, into a national armed forces. I think that the national armed force, I think that is a positive development. So that nation building issue, of course, we know reconstruction, provision of services, electricity, all of those, they don't exist in many parts of the country. All of those are huge challenges. But one of the greatest ones is this nation building in a context where you have divisions that were actively maintained over decades and decades, and we're seeing what's happening because of that. Alawi-Sunni clashes, the Druze I spoke about in the south, at least the Kurdish thing, perhaps it looks like it might be resolved in some way. So all of these challenges exist, which means that Syria is extremely vulnerable. Now, for Israel in particular, but also the United States, the first prize would actually be the same thing that would have been their first prize in Iraq, which they didn't entirely get right, although they came close. The same thing which they regard as their first prize in Iran is for all of these states, breaking these states up into ethnic statelets. If Syria could be broken up into a Kurdish state and an Alawi state and a Druze state that will join Israel, and a Sunni state and a Shia state, that would be ideal for Israel. So the challenge for Syria is to ensure that that doesn't happen, and a Christian state, of course, because there's lots of Christians. The challenge for Syria is that doesn't happen. Thus far, and I'm saying this with caution, thus far there are hopeful noises from the government on this issue, but I think it's a bit early, that we should wait and see. And some of the things that Yvonne pointed to, detentions, etc., journalism, etc., are concerning matters. So the concerning matters we need to raise loudly and forcefully. But I think on the other issues where there are positives, we must cautiously accept that they're there and they have the potential to make Syria a better state, and a state that is actually sovereign, which you can't say it is at the moment when another country occupies part of it, and another country on the other side is waiting for that first one to attack so it can respond, etc. But a sovereign Syria and a strong Syria is what we should be looking forward to.
Yes, and I think also, Yvonne, against what Naeem is saying, and what we've seen is possibly even a carrot and stick approach as far as Syria is concerned. And it's about what the people of Syria want. It is what the Syrian government wants for its people. But also at the same time, when one looks at developments over a period of time and how strategic these developments are, where the Syrian government under Shara offered the United States something that Bashar al-Assad never did, in terms of the removal of Iran, its military infrastructure in Syria. I spoke about Hezbollah as well, but also at the same time, looking at how these engagements have taken place with Western institutions, the integration of Syria in the international financial system, the meetings that Ahmed al-Shara had, or the meeting he had with Donald Trump as well. So what I'm saying is there have been a whole series of events that have actually led to this build-up and where these talks are taking place. Just how much do we read into this?
Well, you're right. There is actually a very powerful economic dimension to all of this. Syria is trying to reinvent itself as a Mediterranean transport and energy corridor connecting Iraq, Turkey, Jordan, and the Gulf states. So plans under discussion include rehabilitating the Kirkuk-Banyas oil route, the Hejaz Railway, and Syrian ports. If stability holds, and of course it's a big if, but if stability holds, geography suddenly becomes one of Syria's greatest assets rather than its curse. And I suppose you have to look, well, what is the biggest single threat? And it's not one foreign power. The biggest threat is a failure to build an inclusive Syrian state. If Kurds, Druze, Alawites, Christians, and Sunnis believe the new Syria belongs equally to them, foreign powers will find it much harder to exploit its divisions. This is something that I would look at the neighbors. Israel does not enjoy stability in other states, and it foments unrest. And this is one of the biggest threats. So I guess that Sharar should really prioritize the treatment of minorities. This is a major test for him. The new Syria must demonstrate through actions, not just constitutional promises alone, that minorities have equal citizenship, security, and political representation. And one of the things that none of them talk about, they don't like to talk about, is that Sharar has a huge problem because of the foreign fighters who helped him win this revolution. You know, does he give them Syrian citizenship? He's given it to some, but not to all. And this is causing unrest, and this is what is starting to fill up some of the prisons in Syria. So he has lots of red flags that he needs to sort out first to be able to transform Syria. And of course, an independent Syria must have room for journalists and critics and independent voices. And you don't establish a democratic political culture by saying, oh, you can criticize the old government, but now you must be silent because we are the new government. It doesn't work like that. So I think one of the biggest challenges is also going to be foreign interference, and Syria cannot really be described as transformed if Syrians remain pawns in a regional or international chess game. You know, the continuing involvement of neighboring and global powers needs very careful scrutiny. Syria could either become the bridge of a new Middle East or its next battleground, and that's the reality. And this is where the Americans could play a huge role, but sadly they won't. You know, America is not a peace builder or a nation builder. And for the first time in generations, there is an opportunity for a Syria that can trade with Turkey, Iraq, and the Gulf, as well as accommodating the Kurds. It is no longer an Iranian client state, but there is also an enormous danger that Syria simply becomes an arena in which Turkey, Israel, Iran, and America settle their competing interests. And that would be a real tragedy, that if Syrians who've survived 14 years of civil war suddenly discover that other countries are still trying to decide the future for them. And as I say, the number one is Israel and is potential Israeli military actions and security interests, and that cannot be ignored. If only Trump would rein in the Israelis, but it's quite clear at the moment that America has no influence over Israel. And you know, it's all of this cocktail of international politics that is really going to focus the minds of al-Sharaa, who, you know, let's be brutally frank, was a jihadist a year ago, and now he's supposed to transform into becoming a statesman. Well, I don't see any immediate role models for him to do that. And but he is going to have to step up to the plate, that's for sure. Some people said to me yesterday, well, you know, how did the Taliban manage to take control of Afghanistan and form a government and appear to run the country smoothly? But the Taliban had been in control of Afghanistan for about 6 or 7 years in the southern part, where they were technically in government, so they had plenty of rehearsal time, if you'd like. to be able to get things right, whereas Shara has just been plucked out of the trenches and told to get suited and booted and drop the gun and become a statesman. And it's not an easy transformation.
Well, certainly not. I'm sure, Naeem, you'd like to actually comment. And, Yvonne, I must say, I quite like some of the terms and the adjective that you use when you speak about, a cocktail for international politics. You speak about a bridge and a battleground. You speak about it as an arena as well, Naeem. And I'm sure there's just so much one can actually take away from what Yvonne just has said. And she spoke about economics and how the money follows the geopolitics of the region, where we've seen Gulf states moving towards major investments, Turkish companies talking about infrastructure opportunities, energy projects that Yvonne speaks about, banking integration, and all of this tells us that, one obviously needs to follow the money, on how possibly the future of Syria may look like. The mic again, please, Naeem.
Sorry, I keep getting muted when I go off. Let me just add a few things to what Yvonne said. Firstly, actually, Ahmed al-Shara for close to a decade was the head of a government in Idlib. The reason that the march to Damascus was as quick as it was partly because of that and the takeover of Damascus, that they had a functioning administration in the Idlib province where they were providing services to people, where they had a police force, they had a military academy, etc. So I'm just saying that he's not, completely plucked out of the trenches. He comes from some background. Now, how much that applies to the whole state as a whole, as opposed to just one province, etc., those are questions to be asked. But there is some background to that. Then, Inayat, you had asked the question, and let me address this directly. You asked me, and I didn't answer it, and then you asked Yvonne, and I don't think she fully answered it, so let me address it directly. The issue of the relationship with Iran, Hezbollah, etc. Let's be clear about this, that Iran played a particular strong role during the civil war in supporting the Assad regime. And that is something that many, many Syrians will not forget. Just jumping into bed with Iran right now is not, I don't think the Shara's administration would look kindly on any such idea. But even if they wanted to, it would be foolishness because of the sentiment among the people. The sentiment against Hezbollah is even stronger than against Iran. Iran, in the main, had advisors, trainers, etc., from the Revolutionary Guard, etc., that were there. But Hezbollah fighters were on the ground. And so the public sentiment in many areas in Syria against Hezbollah is even worse than against Iran. And so the idea that that Syria will again soon could be a transit for weapons, etc., from Iran to Hezbollah, that's not going to happen, whether we want it to or not. That's not going to happen simply because of the history of the past decade and a half. Now, compare, for those two examples to Russia. Russia was also involved in the civil war on the side of Assad, but from the popular perception, the Russians were flying planes and dropping bombs. Ordinary Syrians didn't really see Russians. They felt the effect of the bombs, but they didn't. So on the one hand, it's a little easier to renegotiate relations with Russia. On the other hand, in a very complicated and fragile global geopolitical situation, from a Syrian perspective, dumping the Russians is not a good idea, because then you see yourself spiraling into the quicksands of I'm mixing my metaphors here, but of the American sphere of influence. So even from that perspective, having keeping the Russians happy to some extent is a good idea actually, and that's what they're doing. They maintaining relations with Russia. Shah has been to Russia, and they will continue that. I believe that in time the same kind of approach would be made, or the same kind of reception will be given to Iran, but that's not going to happen soon. As far as the international finance institutions you mentioned, again, this is often mentioned to suggest that that Shara and his administration are selling out the people, jumping into bed with the IMF and World Bank and Global Capital and all of. The fact of the matter is that Syria is multiple times larger than Gaza, and there are several parts of Syria that were reduced to the same kind of rubble and situation as Gaza was. They need money. They need to attract that money, and they need to provide water and electricity and food and all of that for their people. And sometimes, in that situation, you have to bite your tongue and you accept things from places you don't want to. Hopefully, the money that's coming in from Turkey and certain of the Gulf states, etc., will be a big help. But that also there needs to be great amount of caution on. None of these states is doing it because simply they want Syria to prosper. They're all doing it because they see benefit in it for themselves. So the Syrian regime is in this place where they're desperate for support, but they have to be very careful about what support they accept and how they accept it, etc. At the same time, keeping all the people on board and building their own sovereignty. These are huge challenges, each one on its own, but together, it's a massive kind of cocktail of challenges, and I think that it's not an easy road forward. I think that Shara and having suited and booted, as Yvonne says, in the past year and a half, there have been some problems, mistakes, let's call it that. I don't think that there have been serious, massive mistakes that will cause us to point the finger and say they're now going completely in the wrong direction. I mean, the lack of free expression, etc., those are mistakes, certainly. And if they're allowed to continue, they can become serious ones. But right now, in general, I think there's again, I don't want to sound like a cheerleader. I'm saying cautious optimism. We must watch where it goes, and we must call out when it goes wrong. Even the small mistakes, we must call them out. But in general, I think the trajectory is not in the wrong direction, and I don't think that the Syrians are jumping into bed with the Americans or the Israelis or selling out the Syrian people.
Well, certainly, and Naeem, you mentioned cautious optimism, and we've come to the end of the broadcast. But just very quickly, Yvonne, some final comments, because when one looks at these talks, one of the biggest concerns is how this could possibly change the architecture of the Middle East.
Well, I think Syria has changed. The big question is whether it has transformed, because those are two different things. There are green shoots of hope, a possibility of stability, reconstruction, sovereignty, the return of refugees, and the creation of institutions that respect citizens rather than simply control them. But there are also the red flags. And for me, the biggest one is arbitrary detention and the absence of due process, and that has that's led to more than 40 demonstrations alone this year. And this is how the revolution started in the first place, when the graffiti boys, 11 and 12-year-olds, were arrested and brutalized under the Assad regime, and that sparked off unrest. And there are little sparks every now and again with incidents that are happening. Just a few days ago, a man was beaten for 3 days in one of the prisons, and he ended up in hospital and he died. The Interior Minister, Anas Katabi, didn't quite apologize, but he acknowledged the suffering of the man, and 7 police from the station where he was beaten up were arrested. So that sort of rapid response is welcome. They have to show that they are quite different to the Assad regime. And the Syrians who remained behind and stayed and fought with the revolution, they want to return to their towns and cities, and they want to rebuild the country. And there is enough will and determination in the country to succeed, but it's outside forces that may look and may not want Syria to play that crucial role of a bridge in the Middle East.
Yes,
But
Yvonne.
we've just got to hope for the best.
Thank you.
And I think everybody's with the Syrian people, maybe not their government, but definitely with the people.
Thank you. Naim, just finally your thoughts, and I think perhaps just touch briefly on the Israeli factor in terms of how this could possibly play in the hands of the ambitious or the Greater Israel Project and the ambitions of Israel, because we know that they going to even give up any of the territory that they gain until December 2024?
So let me just say one word before that, and that is that, several Syrian friends living outside of Syria, including many Christians, by the way, soon after Damascus was taken over in December 2024, began expressing a sense of optimism, began expressing the sense that when they visit now, and some of them visited within weeks after, that they feel that the air is more open. And that sentiment has been there over the past year and a half, with caution, of course. Some of these people have gone back, many others haven't. Some of them have made lives elsewhere, etc. But there's the sense that there's, after decades and decades of the Assads, that there's a promise for a better future for Syria. And I think that we need to hold on to that and grow that. On the Israeli issue, look, if I said earlier on that we can't trust the Americans, we can trust the Israelis even less. One thing is clear, that we don't have to speculate about their objectives. As Yvonne pointed out, several government ministers have spoken about this Greater Israel Project, about territory that they want to take over in other countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, etc. This is, you can say it's almost policy now. So they and the tension between the White House and the Israeli government at the moment, at a time when the Israeli elections coming up, means that the Israeli government is very unpredictable. They might say and agree to certain things in talks that the Americans mediate, but then do something completely different. So I think that at least the next few months for Syria are going to be very fragile. Because of the Israeli factor. The Israelis could do anything, and they're quite willing to open up a bigger front in Syria. They've also said repeatedly, different ones of them, that after Iran, the next target is Turkey. Now, they haven't dealt with Iran to their satisfaction yet, but they might decide to turn their focus on Turkey. And where will the battleground be? Not in Istanbul and Ankara. The battleground will be in Aleppo and Damascus. And I think that is a great fear, that if the Israelis push into Syria in that way to confront the Turks, that once again Syria could be destroyed because of outside forces.
Well, Naeem, shukran, jazakallah khairan so much for that to both you, Yvonne, and to Naeem, for your time with us here on Salam Media. And let's just wait and see what develops and what evolves as far as the talks are concerned, what some of the outcomes are as well. I'm sure both of you are watching with a lot of interest as well. But for now, we thank you. We always appreciate you taking time out for us here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.
Yes, that brings us to the end of another edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Wednesday evening. And once again, a discussion that is just so much food for thought in what we're saying. And right towards the end, I think both Dr. Yvonne Ridley and Jeenah reinforced, some of the red flags that one actually needs to look out for in terms of these talks that are taking place. We certainly will follow developments. We will keep you updated, and we will obviously have a lot more discussion once these talks obviously present a clearer picture in terms of where all of this is going to go. But for now, I'm going to be signing off. And once again, a pleasure being in your company from myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.